I never use my turn signal. God, there's really no way to say that without sounding like a gigantic asshole, is there? I can practically hear the hate mail pouring in as I type this. But it's true. I don't ever use my turn signal. Not anymore. It happened 6 months ago. I was driving down a stretch of road late in the afternoon, cursing my boss for making me work after hours. Again. The only nice thing about it, I remember thinking, is that I get to beat rush hour. I saw hardly any cars on the road that day, except for that one. I was caught off guard when it appeared behind me. It seemed like it had come out of nowhere, and I silently chided myself for being so inattentive. It was a beat-up old thing. I could tell by just looking in my rearview mirror. The front license plate was missing, and the windshield was cracked. The hood looked like it was being held down with duct tape. I couldn't make out the figure in the driver's seat very clearly, but it looked like a man, hidden in the shadows. I didn't pay it much mind after I noticed. I switched on my radio and was humming along to the latest pop music had to offer, my mind on everything I had to do once I reached my parents' house. They'd invited me home for the weekend, hence the long, boring drive in the middle of nowhere. I stayed on the highway for about 2 hours before reaching my exit. I turned on my signal out of habit and drifted to the exit ramp. That was when I noticed that the car was still behind me. It was in fact taking the same exit. I frowned as I watched it. What are the odds? I thought, a silver of unease warming in my gut. At the end of the ramp, I signaled right and followed through. The car did the same. My heart began to beat faster as I took a deep, slow breath. It's probably nothing, I muttered to myself. It's not that unusual to take a few turns in the same direction. You're overreacting, again. I turned the music off as I continued down the road for a few minutes. Eventually, I reached the first of many narrow gravel roads that would eventually take me to my parents' place. I turned left, and the car did the same. Okay, now you can start panicking, I thought, grabbing my phone from the passenger seat. I never used the phone when I was driving, but this was an emergency. I dialed my dad's number, hoping he'd have an idea. Maybe he can meet me at the door with the shotgun. No signal. I stared at my phone for a moment in disbelief. You got to be fucking kidding me. Panic started to rise up again as I tried to dial 911. Please work, please work, please work. Again, no signal. I looked back up at the road and saw I was about to miss my next turn. Crap, I shouted, slamming on my brakes and skidding on the gravel. I took the right-hand turn at a speed that made me wince and didn't do anything for the rabbiting of my heart. But somehow, I didn't end up in the ditch. Neither did the car behind me. My hands were shaking as I held onto the wheel. I was about 10 minutes from home at that point. I just need to make it a few more miles, then everything will be okay. Just a little bit more. And then my car started to slow down. What the? I pushed the pedal to the floor, no longer caring about the spinning out. Still, the car slowed further and further until it was crawling. Finally, it stopped. The engine switched off. No, 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 I muttered, twisting and turning the key so violently, I was surprised it didn't break in the ignition. I sat there in complete disbelief, my mouth hanging open and my breathing coming in uneven. In the rearview mirror, I saw the car flashing its headlights. Once, then twice. A surge of anger and fear hit me so hard I could barely breathe. I wanted to get out, go up to the driver and scream at them for terrifying me. But I couldn't do that. What if they hurt me? Who knew who was in the driver's seat? That's when I remembered the shovel. I had a shovel in my trunk. Not for anything nefarious, I promise. I'd helped out with the community garden a few days earlier, and had forgotten to take it out when I got home. I can grab it, I thought to myself. I can pop the trunk, run back, and get the shovel. At least then, I have a fighting chance of defending myself. Briefly, I considered just waiting in the car and locking the doors. But what if he comes and breaks the window? The engine's dead. My phone has no service, and I have nothing here to defend myself with. I'll just get the shovel and then jump back inside and lock the doors. It'll only take a few seconds. I can do this. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I pushed the button to open the trunk at the same time as I threw the car door open. As I stepped out, so did the driver of the other vehicle. It was a male figure, tall and slim and wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Most curious of all, he was standing there facing away from me. I froze and stared at him. "Get the shovel, get the shovel, get the shovel," my brain hissed. I took one hesitant step forward, the gravel crunching beneath my foot, and waiting to see what would happen. The man didn't move. I sprinted for the trunk, keeping my eye on the man. I only looked away for a second to search for the shovel. Once I had it in my hand, I slammed the trunk shut and spun around. The man was several feet closer to me. I hadn't even heard him move. Fuck. I backed towards the front seat, watching him. He stayed perfectly still. As soon as I reached the front of the car, I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut. I engaged a lock and clutched the shovel next to me, squeezing my eyes shut for just a moment as I tried to get my heartbeat under control. When I opened my eyes again, I screamed. He was standing next to the door, still facing backward, but now I could see his profile. He had no discernible facial features. His entire face was a mess of blood and mauled flesh. It looked like he shoved it into a meat grinder or perhaps a wood chipper. I shoved myself away from the door, scrambling across to the passenger side. I pressed myself against the passenger side door as hard as I could, watching as he slowly turned to face me. I saw his arm shift and heard him pulling on the door handle. The lock held. He waited a moment, somehow staring me down without eyes. I choked back my screams as I watched him back. Then he started to bash his head on the door. He did it over and over, hitting the door with his face, splattering blood all over the side of my car. The noise was unbearable. Heavy thuds accompanied by wet, squelching noises as his flesh was further damaged. As I sat there, shrieking, begging for him to stop, the window cracked. It took all the courage I didn't know I possessed, but I reached out and twisted the key in the ignition once again, praying that it would start. By some miracle, the car roared to life. Still, the man wouldn't stop maiming himself against my car. I crawled back into the driver's seat, hearing the crack in the window spread as he pounded and pounded and pounded. I floored it. The wheel spun for a second on the gravel before the car lurched forward, shooting down the road like a bat out of hell. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man, facing backward once again, not moving an inch either towards his car or mine. I took the next turn, then the next until I arrived at the house. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the man was gone. All that was left was me and my bloody cracked window. My parents thought I hit a deer and got a concussion. That's why I conjured up this crazy story about the bloody backwards man. Never mind that I wouldn't have hit a deer with the side of my car. They refused to believe what I told them, and threatened to check me into the hospital if I insisted on calling the police to report something that could never have happened. I didn't bother telling my friends. They'd call me crazy too. Instead, I turned to the internet. I posted on every forum I could think of, searching every paranormal site I could find to see if anyone else has experienced the same thing. My search so far has turned up nothing. For weeks, I was too afraid to get back into my car. After I drove back from my parents' house, a drive that mostly consisted of hyperventilating and crying, I parked it in the garage and stuck with public transport. Eventually, I couldn't avoid driving anymore. I got back on the road, and for a month or so, things were okay. But then, one morning on my way to work, when the sun was just coming over the horizon and the road was deserted, I saw that car in my rearview mirror again. This time, I floored it immediately. I took the first exit I came to at an intense speed, then took every random turn after that. 10 minutes later, I lost him. It's happened a few times since then, always when I'm alone. So far, I've been able to outrun him every time. I drive as fast as I can. I go in random directions. I take all the turns I can manage. And I never, ever use my turn signal. So, if you ever catch me on the road, turning without indicating, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turning white, I'm sorry. Really, I am. But I can't afford to take any chances. I don't know where he might be hiding, or what the hell he is. All I know is that I have to stay one step ahead, because if he gets me alone again, well, I won't be getting a second chance.